Let me see. I don't have much battery, but we'll go as long as it goes. Introduce yourself.
Okay. Hi, I'm George Hewitt. I'm the son of Nona Severson, Nona Hewitt. I used to live up here in Ulen, Minnesota, when I was in the 7th grade. My dad was over in Turkey. We came up here because of my grandmother, who lived in this town all of her life, as did all of my mother's brothers and sisters. They grew up here, went to high school, moved away to various parts of the country. In my case, I moved away in 1957 and haven't been back here until now, so it's a considerable amount of time. I can certainly tell you that Ulen has not changed a bit. Recognized everything when I came into town.
Sure.
And, it was really good to bump into you right off.
Now, did you, at what age did you leave Ulen here?
I must have been about 11 years old.
11? So you were going to some school?
Sure, I went to the 7th grade here.
7th grade?
7th grade.
And then where did you move to after that?
We went back to Virginia. My dad was stationed down in Virginia, and so we moved there. And we stayed there until I went into the service. I joined the service in 1965.
Sure.
And stayed in for 28 years. My dad retired about 7 or 8 years after we moved to Virginia. So,
how many years did your dad have
he had
in?
34 years in the service.
And how about yourself?
28. So,
28.
So we had a few years.
You certainly did. I didn't realize you had been in that long. What MOS or what did you do?
When I first joined the Army, I was a straight-leg infantry. I went to Vietnam, came back, went into the Special Forces training program. Did that along with counterintelligence, military intelligence organization.
Sure.
For the next 28 years.
Were you overseas quite a bit?
Yeah, I did 3 tours in Vietnam, 1 in
you did?
Thailand, 1 in Korea, 2 in Germany.
Sure.
So I spent a considerable.
I visited with your dad. I only met your dad maybe about 3 times. Mm-hmm. I remember just after he had gotten out of the war, World War II, I met him on the street in Ulen along with my dad, and then only a couple of other times. Yeah. And I was wishing I could have videotaped him one time, but he said he didn't grant an interview to anybody else, and he didn't want to start now.
Yeah. Well, in his behalf, I'll grant you this one. This is unusual, but I'll do it.
Well, anyway, I know he suffered some rough times there in the prisoner camp. Can you tell me just a little bit about that?
Well, my dad joined the service as a young man during the Depression, basically. He went through an indoctrination training period, went into the services, and was shipped to the Philippines just before the outbreak of the war. They knew that Pearl Harbor was coming, but there wasn't much they could do about it. Mm-hmm. They had better intelligence, perhaps, than Washington, D.C. did, because when it hit, it was no surprise to them. My dad was captured. He spent 4 years in Japan.
4 years? How long was he prisoner?
4 years.
4 years? Yeah. Is that right?
An interesting story there is that when he was released, the first person he met was his own cousin, his one and only cousin from St. Paul, Minnesota. They met on a train station in the middle of the night. My dad was weighing about 90 pounds.
Is that right?
He was a skeleton, but someone remembered that, his commanding officer was from Minnesota. They met, and also the governor of Minnesota was there at that time in service, and also assisted my dad's repatriation back to the United States.
Sure.
Eventual career.
Okay, what rank did he reach?
He was a full colonel.
He was a full colonel.
When he retired, interestingly enough there too, if he had not been a prisoner, he probably would have made general.
Yes, yes.
You were not advanced in rank when you were spending time in POW camps.
No.
As a matter of fact, his cousin, who had come into the service just at the beginning of the Second World War, by the end of the Second World War was already a lieutenant colonel. He returned to civilian life. My dad stayed in.
Sure.
It took him another 30 years just about to get up to the rank of colonel.
Yeah. How about yourself? What rank were you?
Came in as a private, got out as a warrant officer.
Very good.
So I was fortunate to live through it. And,
sure. What are you doing nowadays? You're retired.
Retired, but I still work for the government. I'm a contractor and a systems analyst for computer systems, security issues revolving around computer systems in Washington, D.C.
I see.
Work for DOJ, Department of Justice.
Sure. Okay, talk about your family.
Okay, I'm married. In addition to that, my wife is in Cumyon, and she's living in Stafford, Virginia, waiting on my return.
Yes.
If I can drive that far back. It's for peace up here. My mom is living in Florida at the time. My sister
What part of Florida?
in Jacksonville, along with my other sister Kathy.
Okay.
My other sister Janine is living in Atlanta. My oldest sister Sandra is living in Suisun City in California.
Sure.
Probably suffering from El Nino.
Let's see, Sandra, was she a little older than you?
Yes, she'd be about your age, as a matter
Yes,
of fact.
yes.
Perhaps
I
a
am
year-
60.
Yeah, she'd probably be a year or two younger than you.
Sure, sure. I haven't seen her for years.
Yeah. Now, she lived, when my dad was a prisoner of war, both my sister and my mother lived at Turtle Lake, just outside of St. Paul, Minnesota.
I see.
For the 4 years that he was a prisoner, with the exception of some time in California. My mom worked in the B-17 factories out there, helping wire up those airplanes.
Sure, is that right? Your mother, you say?
She was what do they call
I
it?
didn't know that.
Rosie the Riveter, right? For about a year.
I never knew that.
Yeah, along with I believe it was my sister, my aunt Maud, who also just passed away only a few years ago.
Yes.
Was also the youngest daughter. I think the two of them, I'm not sure if Aunt Rada went out there or not. Rada and Custer Severson both live in Coon Rapids, Minnesota. And, my Aunt Nellie is out in California. Geez, boy, this is a test.
Do you mind if I ask you your age?
I'm 50.
You're 50.
Which is not fair because you look younger than I do.
No. I'm 10 years older than you.
Yeah.
I'm 60 now.
Well, I certainly, I can only say it must be the good life up here.
Well, let's see. The only ones I knew were you and Sandra. And you had, two other sisters?
Yeah, there was two other sisters.
Two other sisters.
And Janine and Kathy, they're the youngest ones, right? Like I said, they're in Jacksonville and Atlanta.
Okay. Let's see. When did you start out from Washington, D.C.?
Tuesday at noon.
Tuesday.
And, yeah, it's a big country.
And today is Thursday.
Yeah, so I made it in
Are you heading right back again? Or?
I'll go back on Saturday. It's about a 20-hour drive, maybe 21 hours from here to Virginia.
Where are you staying while you're here? Are you down at Custer's? Or?
Well, I'll go back to the Twin Cities and probably spend the night with them. I, popped into hotels on the way up. And,
very good.
But it's a beautiful ride. If you haven't made the trip,
I have never been out to Washington, D.C. I'd like to do that someday.
With the exception of Chicago, the drive's real nice.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Lots of interstates, so it isn't too bad that way.
65, 70 miles an hour all the
Sure,
way.
sure.
Potholes, right? So,
Well,
you get DC, right?
Can you think of a few other things that would be something to put down here? I kind of like to save this. I've got many hours of my dad.
It's very interesting that I come back up here for my Uncle Schuyler's funeral. When I look back on it, if there's one thing I'd like to remember him for, he really did teach me what money was about. He was always the person who was traveling. I used to think he was a cowboy, as a matter of fact, because he used to go out to Montana and Wyoming.
He spent quite a few years out there.
Certainly did. And he was always just kind of drifting into and out of our lives as young children.
Sure.
But one day here, I got my first paying job here in Ulen at the age of about 9 or 10, helping a gentleman dig a trench in front of his house. And he was paying me about 25 cents, maybe 50 cents a day to help him, right? Which I thought was big bucks because back then the dollar went a lot further. Well, my uncle came up and visited Schuyler, and he helped me dig that hole that day because I think he knew it was hot, and I wanted it 50 cents.
Sure.
Well, when we were done, the gentleman gave him $1 and gave me 50 cents, and I thought he was going to give me the $1.
Sure.
But, instead, he gave it back to the man. And afterwards, I asked him why. And he says, the man needed help, right? He says, I thought you were helping me. He says, well, I was, but he needed help too. And I gave him the $1 back. And I think it taught me something.
Sure, well, very nice.
What money and helping others is
right,
about.
Right.
So, there's something I'll remember that gentleman for, other than our crooked hair. That's the main thing.
Okay, well, I guess I don't have any more, and thank you very much. This is very interesting.
Gordon, it's my pleasure, and your dad was always an inspiration to our family.
Did you meet him very often? Or?
I met him a couple of times as a very young man.
Sure.
And I think the most interesting thing is how my dad used to refer to your dad constantly about that World War I hero.
Uh-huh.
And it's like guys like him, Schuyler and your dad, and Uncle Custer, who make up this country.
Sure.
Served with a lot of them.
I didn't hear a whole, well, I heard some of the World War I, but it was in his latter years that he started talking more and more about it.
Yeah.
So,
it's not easy to talk about. And
no.
I certainly tell you that, as a young man, guys like Schuyler and your dad had a lasting impression on me. So, I think it's important that young people today.
You have been one of the easiest persons to interview I have ever had. No, I've talked to...
I'm starting to think about it. You might want to turn the sucker off.
Well, we will turn it off here in a minute. Maybe it's a little more comfortable, but I really appreciate that. Thank you.
My pleasure. About 9:30. Okay. Yeah, they said that